Making landing pages look as fancy as these mostly takes design skills, but if we pick some of the patterns they used, we can easily create our own. You'll see that a dark background, a big gradient text, a blurred glow and a repeating pattern will really do the magic here. For this project I chose a grid pattern like this one. We'll add one more unique element and create this with it. Now let's start easy. You would think making a gradient text would be as easy as passing a gradient color to the text, but no. But backgrounds can be gradients, and I've heard of this property that only displays the background color on the area that's covered by text. But since the text color now covers the backgrounds, we can set that to transparent. Sweet. Well, that was easier than I thought. Next, let's get this pattern glow to work. It's actually split up in two elements. One for the glow and one for the grid. And actually the glow is just a blurred gradient. So let's give it some dimensions and a gradient background color first. Position it absolutely and in the middle of the screen. Make it an ellipse. Move it up by half its size and add the magic trick that does it all. Next step, the grid. You can pick an SVG from the internet for this, but I'll show you how easy it is to create this one yourself. It's only some squares after all. 8 × 8 small ones in every big one actually, where the small ones have a thinner stroke than the big ones. Luckily we don't have to write out every single square since we can just put it in a pattern element. I don't want to write the width and height twice, so I'll just make the rectangles the full size of the pattern. The pattern units is needed to use the values relative to the space that the elements are in, but I won't dive too deep into explaining this one. A pattern element on itself won't be shown on the screen though, so we need to reference it from another rectangle that covers the entire area. In our case, this will be a 1600 by 480 area, which you could set with the width and height of the SVG, but that won't make it scale up or down when we resize. So instead we're going to set a view box with an X and Y of 0, and that will give us the same result, but now it will scale up or down based on the parent element size. But let's get back to where we were and make the fill transparent so that we can see the glow through it. Now if we also want to repeat the big rectangles, then we can perform the same trick as before using the pattern element. Now all we still need to do is make sure that the grid only displays at the glow and make it a little bit less transparent. I know about this property called mask image, which multiplies the opacity with a custom image. Now what would happen if we pass a circle to it? We'll get a circular grid. And what if we make this circle a radial gradient? Nice. Now let's lower the opacity and the glowing grid is done. So what's next? The bubble effect from this website looked pretty cool to me, so I went to recreate it and made some changes to it. Let's first check out what actually happens here. I'll give you 5 seconds to pause the video and think of the 4 unique properties of these bubbles. Now you've probably seen that they have different colors, but only 2 actually, since the opacity also changes. And lastly, the size and X position are also randomly generated for each bubble. But let's take a step back. How do we get the bubble to appear on the screen? As always, let's start with a div. Every 100 milliseconds, I'm going to spawn a div with a bubble class and drop it in a box full of bubbles. Bubbles are usually round and will appear all over the place, so I'll make them absolutely positioned. Now I want it to spawn below the screen, but if I set the bottom to 0, it will only hit the bottom. I could translate it down its full size, but then I would have 2 properties that I need to animate later when I want to get the bubble above the screen. So instead I'm going to set the top value. If it's 0, it will be at the top of the screen, but if I set it to the full height of the screen, it will be exactly hidden. So initially it will need to have that value, but after it's spawned, I can change the top to be above the screen. Now 0 will move it back to hit the top border, but if we want to move it above, we'll need to know its size. The size needs to differ for each bubble, so this small function here should return a value between 2 values. Use its negative value to move it up right above the screen. And let's set the size of the bubble to this value as well. Oh, and I almost forgot, the animate function needs a duration parameter as well, so let's set it to somewhere between 10 and 40 seconds. The longer it takes, the slower the bubble will go. Now let's see how that looks. I think we forgot the X position. We want that to be a random value between 0, which is the left side, and the total width of the bubbles container, which would be the right side. Now offset the bubble based on that value and cool. But why are the bubbles sticking to the top? I thought we moved it above the top. Turns out they actually animate out of the screen, but once the animation is done, they reset to the default top, which is 0. But that's not a problem because we should remove the elements once the animation is done anyways. And now all there is left to do is give them a random color and opacity and we're done. Awesome. Now if you understood this, then the last part will be easy for you. This button needs a gradient border, but how? Once again, just setting a gradient border doesn't work here, so let's trick the user and use a gradient background for the anchor tag. Then put a dark span element inside of it. The margin from the anchor will then decide how much of the gradient background of the anchor we will see. Apply the same border radius as for the parent, display it inline, and we're done. Apply the same trick for the bottom element, which you'll often see being used to transition to the next part of your front page. And with a few seconds left before hitting the 5-minute mark, I'll wrap it up here. Please subscribe if this helped you, and I'll see you in the next one.